Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Monarchist Minute. I believe this is episode 21. This
Yes,
is Dante Marino here, your reporter from the events of the March for Life at the Capitol. So, I guess, should I just start?
Yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead.
All right. So, my day today was actually, thankfully, pretty uneventful. Just a lot of marching. Woke up around 6:45, showered, did all that. Then I hopped on a bus and traveled over to Gonzaga. We had a mass there for the Unborn. I believe, if I remember correctly, that Pope Francis said, like, if you went to a mass today and, like, you went on the march, you would get the plenary indulgence. Just if my memory doesn't fail me. But after that, we went and got some, early lunch with brunch, and we got some Chick-fil-A. We actually went back to Chick-fil-A later. But after that, what you're all probably waiting for is we got to the rally, and a few people were coming in. There was someone from Duck Dynasty, of all places. And then my favorite part, which he was cheered on by everyone there, was Father Mike Schmidt, the host of Bible in a Year. Yeah, everyone was cheering him on. Me and the guys who I went with, we made a custom banner of In Hoc Signo Vinces, the quote from Constantine. And actually, it was so popular that people were using us as a waypoint, and that was how we were able to be identified. Continuing on after that, then me and my close friend on Discord, his name is Smeagol, we met up with one of his friends from New Hampshire. They had come traveling with a group of Franciscan monks. So we marched with them. We were actually being used as the sort of group leaders because I was carrying a Vatican flag and my friend was carrying the In Hoc Signo Vinces flag. We marched on for a few hours. I think we started marching around 1, then we stopped at around 3 or 4. It was actually really uneventful. It was really peaceful. We did almost lose some of the guys back in the back, but hold up. The flag is In Hoc Signo Vinces. I'll put it in the chat if you want. It translates from Latin into English as "In this sign you will conquer."
Ooh.
Yeah. Yeah. So it had that quote, and it had a symbol of the Cairo on it. And we marched with the Franciscans. They were very nice. We had no run-in with anyone with no hecklers. We didn't see any hecklers at all, actually. Like, it was all just pure positive anti-abortion protesting. Lots of prayers, lots of hopes that this would be the last year of abortion being legal in the United States, considering the case in June, I believe. Fact check.
Yes,
I want to agree with that date.
Yes,
Yeah.
it would be decided this summer.
Yeah.
But it
Yeah,
wouldn't.
hopefully-
But it wouldn't make abortion illegal. It would just punt it down to the states.
Right. Which, I mean, hey, it's a victory, but not the total victory. Yeah, something like that, Stout. Okay, continuing on. Where's that at? Yeah, so no hecklers, and lots of Christians there. Unsurprisingly, lots of speakers, Protestant, Catholic. There was actually a lot of Orthodox Christians at the march, if I remember correctly, and we tried to catch up with a few of them. We weren't able to. I know one of the groups which we saw, we actually did almost get to talk to, but no one could hear us over their bagpipes. Was TFP Student Action. So they had their bagpipes, they had their drums out. It was incredibly fun. We were all laughing. We were all we were all just having a great time. Yeah, I'm trying to think of anything. I can't really think of anything else. It was just a really good day. Weather was a little cold.
Don't I know it? Thank you very much for the report from the March for Life, Dante. A reading from Second Maccabees.
Oh.
In those days, the most valiant man Judas, making a gathering, sent 12,000 drachmas of silver to Jerusalem for sacrifice to be offered for the sins of the dead, thinking well and religiously concerning the resurrection. For if he had not hoped that they that were slain should rise again, it would have seemed superfluous and vain to pray for the dead. And because he considered that they who had fallen asleep with godliness had great grace laid up for them. It is therefore a holy and wholesome thought to pray for the dead, that they may be loosed from sins. That is the epistle from the traditional Latin Mass, Requiem Mass on the anniversary of a death. And today we commemorate the anniversary not just of Roe versus Wade, which takes place tomorrow at the time of this recording, but today, at the time of this recording, we also commemorate the loss of the last king of France, the last pre-revolutionary king of
Yeah, I was about to
France,
say. I was about to say.
Louis the 16th,
I
murdered on
another.
this
Yeah.
day.
And he was emperor, not king.
What?
Well, no, I was talking about I believe it was the Bourbon reclamation of the throne. You
Oh
had
yes, but before that, before we discuss Louis the 16th, we will discuss one of the most tragic days in not just American history, but world history. On January 22nd, 1970, I want to say the Supreme Court decided in the landmark case Roe versus Wade that abortion is a constitutional right, or not really a constitutional right, but abortion is protected under the privacy law of, I believe, the Fourth Amendment?
Yeah.
And it has resulted in the mass slaughter of hundreds of millions of people, not just in the United States, but around the world as well, as other nations have used Roe v. Wade to craft abortion legislation. And I know that I don't need to be so formal about this, but this is one of the most sensitive topics in world history, so I feel that a little bit of formality is needed here. Roe is it has devastated the lives of so many people that are unborn, and joining me to talk about this are our regular cohorts, a mournful Charles York, an equally as mournful John Arnis, and a very positive William Stout, as well as Dante Marino, who you heard from earlier.
You know,
So,
we might want to clarify that, because otherwise it's gonna make Will seem bad.
yeah. Don't
Well,
think. Hey, yeah,
would
hey,
you like to clarify that? I was going for more of a sarcastic Charles Cologne type thing. So, Will, if you want to clarify that for our audience.
I don't know how to clarify because I don't know what you're trying to imply here.
Oh. Uh,
You know, let's leave the adjective intros to off the menu, because
That is
look,
not funny.
Well, they don't know that, Will. I mean, not Will, Vic. Anyways,
Anyway, so,
no,
I have to
so
prove my
who
point
wants
now.
to?
For those of you who don't get the joke, Victor was making a joke. If you hear me cough throughout the podcast, earlier this week I tested positive with COVID. And so
Okay, if you're listening at home, every time he coughs, take a shot.
pop
anyway,
It's a good thing.
If you're
Good
under
thing.
21, let it be like NyQuil or something.
I'm not.
Yeah, it's
trust me, I've
That
been
is
taking
that is not
Nyquil, I've been
medical
taking
advice,
Dayquil.
ladies
It's
and
not
gentlemen. Full
helping.
disclaimer.
Yeah, it's a good thing Aiden isn't here. Otherwise, he'd definitely be getting sacked over this.
You'd hear,
Anyways,
actually, our resident nurse,
Anyway,
we might not want to call him that.
he's gonna be listening to this. And he's like, those mother. Yeah.
anyway,
Anyways, so who wants to
let's go back. Let's go back to Roe v. Wade here, everybody.
kill the party mood?
I
So is
All right.
that 3 shots or just one?
Just
That's
one.
wish any number of shots worked. Nyquil just doesn't cut it.
Try Dayquil.
I have nothing in my house, so I can't do anything.
I'm using the severe. I'm using the heavy duty stuff, and it still won't cut it.
Anyway, let's
Let's,
dial it back to be serious here and talk about Roe.
I guess I'll take the lead if anybody has any objections. No? Okay, I win. Yeah, 50 years is that's quite a long time. I mean, it's interesting. By now, I'm going to wager that just by numbers, in fact, I bet $5 on it, that a majority of Americans who are alive right now live in a post Roe v. Wade world. And the number of people who, and a great many more, technically were born in a pre-Roe v. Wade world. But if you're like 4, really, do you comprehend what abortion is? Yeah, it's. I mean, we've talked about Roe v. Wade and abortion on the podcast a few times before, but it's still just, I don't know, icky. Of all the rotten things that America's done, and that's not to say that, and obviously I still love this country, but of all the things that we've done that are just terrible, our interference in Latin America in the 1830s all the way to, well, I guess the present, really. Our absolute refusal, our whole obsession with unconditional surrender, which results in many unnecessary casualties. This has to be the most vile, and the fact that we inflicted it on our own populace is just, I don't know. It's I mean,
yeah. Like, something I learned studying history extensively is America really is a bastion of. I still love America. It's a bastion of hypocrisy, and Roe v. Wade really proves that the slippery slope is real. It's not like a thing that is a falsehood. It's kind of like slowly slipping into. If you want to use a political term, slowly boiling the frog. And really, Roe v. Wade was kind of the beginning of that. And we were constantly told that, like, things like this will be, it'll stop eventually with all this kind of stuff. And it hasn't. It really hasn't. And we let this slip. And now, what is the statistics? I don't have this statistics with me, but I do know that millions of children, probably, we can get the numbers up for that. It's just so unimaginably destructive. And the fact that they're in the womb really doesn't matter. The fact that they're in the womb really doesn't matter at all. Millions have been dead since Roe v. Wade was put into effect. I think tens of millions. I don't know. Might want to check me
I
on
think
it.
the current numbers, at least a couple of years ago, were about 800,000 a year. Maybe, I don't know. I've heard anywhere from like 500,000 to 1,000,000 in this country every year, which is obviously
That times
I don't know.
50. That times 50. That is around 50 million dead children. So
50 million. And we can draw parallels to the Holy Innocents if in case you're not Christian, King Herod, when he heard of the prophecy concerning when Jesus was born, he had all of the baby boys of Judea that were 2 years old and younger killed because he heard that a king was born and he didn't want a challenger to his throne, and not understanding that this king was not going to be an earthly king but a heavenly king, but which caused Joseph to take Mary and Jesus and flee into Egypt on command of the archangel, I believe it was Gabriel.
Yeah,
and you got to think, and we like to compare, but really look at the population back then. This is around a few years AD. Around, I think people have it at about 3 AD or something like that. But it's so much. 50 million dead children, or roughly 50 million. Just look back and see how many people were born or even existed during the time of Christ. It's very,
If I may interject, that's roughly a seventh of the U.S. population right now.
yeah. Let me just quickly look up the
yeah, hold on.
population during.
Yeah, 1 AD, about apparently the global population, just doing the quick Google search, but it says .gov, so it must be right. The 300 million. So we've just
That's
been using,
global.
yeah, globals. Obviously, it wasn't like there were 300 million Indians and chilling about in the continental U.S. Uh, let's see. So yeah. Actually, we've just been using this 50 million as sort of just estimating in our heads, but yeah, even if that's remotely accurate, that's 1/6 of the world population at that time, over a 50-year. And you have to remember, the world population didn't really grow that much until, a few,
Industrialization.
yeah, until people stopped
It
dying.
is, yeah, what Herod did to the extreme. I want us to get a good look at that. It is what Herod did to the extreme. Not only
Yeah,
did like order the killing of babies, but we we don't even care about what happens to the children. We're not even conscious of it. At least those who are in power, who provide this stuff. My body, my choice. 50 million children are not on this planet from that. So, really, there's no excuse for it. I know we can throw around, oh, well, what if,
What
like,
if a child was conceived by the product
yeah,
of rape
yeah,
or incest?
that,
yeah.
That's
Those sorts of
that's,
dealios.
common
that's what I'll
arguments.
that's what I'll kind of tag on. I think we've got into this before, but let me just reiterate. Repealing Roe versus Wade is just the start. It's just the start. We need to make laws and revamp communities to be more helpful about women who are suffering from rape recovery, who've been abused and may be pregnant from it, may not be pregnant from it, may have, STDs from it. We need to look into how do we solve that? Because that's also if you want to get biblical here, if you want to get religious here, that is a sin too, you know? And what do we do with that? What do we do with that? Um, We need to focus on all 7 of the deadly sins as opposed to just looking at, okay, we need to repeal Roe versus Wade. I absolutely agree we need to repeal it. We need to repeal it and then go further. And that doesn't mean just repealing abortion laws. Abortion laws should be illegal. But we need to have laws replacing it to allow greater acceptance and support for women who are currently single moms, who are future single moms of a sexual assault victim child or something like that, who's recovering.
Or even if the sex was consensual.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just say this on the matter of rape. Assuming the rapist doesn't have any dependencies of his own, his property should be liquidated and then or seized and handed over to the woman, and none of that government dipping in and taking a little percentage of it. But still, like, because rapists should be locked in jail forever. But
Yeah.
Should be hung. Let's go a step further.
Well, currently the church's position on the death penalty sort of prevents that. But
I'm more along the lines of rehabilitation, but I kind of see where you're coming from.
Yeah, I mean, I just,
It financially makes sense. If they're going to stay in prison, they are then a burden on the taxpayer.
Well, firstly, you can. Well, you
I
can
mean,
have them
they are.
making license plates and stuff, and then because your Secretary of State needs license plates to hand out, especially in my state, because like you see 1 in every 10 drivers don't have a plate. Anyways, no, I mean, just giving. I don't know. I would say that generally, I mean, I would say that being against the death penalty simply for the reason that it gives them more time to possibly repent, like because people in jail have done that, and then and so I mean there's that, and then also the fact that even when the church did say that the death penalty was acceptable, original like the last before Pope Francis changed like the Constitution, um it was only acceptable in the case that that not executing the person would lead to like more death, like assuming that you couldn't for whatever reason hold a mass murderer. He kept still getting out of prison, like it's like El Chapo, and he still keeps escaping or whatnot, and that leads to more people dying. So and in that case, in order to you're doing it as honest as sound, you're ending a life to preserve life. It was essentially when it was acceptable, but the Pope says not ever, which, I mean, given that prison escapes aren't that common in civilized countries, I guess.
Nah,
And just to be clear here, we are not talking about situations in which a woman has sort of like an ectopic pregnancy, or the baby's already dead, or something along the lines of, if she if she is forced to carry this baby to term, she died.
Well, there is a caveat to that. It's
Well,
supposed to
yes.
be, if you are saving the woman's life, it can't be directly killing the baby, but you
Correct.
can save the woman's life and by a byproduct accidentally kill the child. So it's not you kill the child for the sake of the woman. It is you save the woman and by accident the child dies, or by result the child dies. So
yes, we should be saying by result, not by accident, because the intended consequence is to
well,
save the mother's
do it
life,
by
but the unintended
force.
consequence is the unfortunate death of the baby.
Yeah. Well, I kind of use accident as if you're not intentionally, so it's non-purposeful killing. It is the purposeful saving of the woman's life.
Correct, and that is the principle of double effect. That is your theology lesson for the day, ladies and gentlemen.
Tune in next week for more Catholic social teaching. Just
anyone
wondering.
else have any thoughts on Roe before we before we move on to our main event?
I actually have a few things. John, earlier you mentioned my body, my choice. It is interesting because in the original ruling of Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court specifically said bodily autonomy is not a justifiable excuse for the legalization of abortion.
Oh, okay. I mean,
Specifically said
my body
bodily
only applies.
autonomy is not enough of a legal excuse to justify abortion according to the Constitution.
I mean, I like to think of it as like, okay, there's this innocent thing in my house. If I kill it, then, if there's a child in my house right now, by complete accident, maybe the child wandered into my house, and I shoot that child, that would be murder. Am I right? Now, an innocent person in the womb, an innocent child in the womb, technically in your property. So if your land is in a sense an extension of yourself in a way, you own that land, and the child is innocently wandered onto that land. Say they ran away from their parents and they hid in your house or something like that. And you come to your house and find them there and then just shoot them. That would be murder. That would be a heinous act. But why does it then change? Why does it then change when that child is inside of you? And why does that, even if that child,
Why does it change that if a woman gets an abortion, the child dies, it's not murder, but if the woman on the way to the abortion gets hit by a drunk driver, it's double
it's
manslaughter.
double. Yep. Yeah. So there you have it. There is the big. Why is this a double standard? Why is this a double standard? It's ultimately,
Completely illegally there. It's been there
yeah.
for years.
I mean, I'm all for pointing out hypocrisy, but I mean, I don't even think we need to point to any example of secular law. I mean, obviously, it's still.
I mean, we
have
could
to
point to secular law because Lord knows those who do support Roe v. Wade use secular law. And if we could disprove Roe v. Wade with secular law, they have even less legs to stand on.
Well, yeah, no, but I mean, my point is that the secular law, as evidenced by things like Roe v. Wade and all the state abortion laws, is that a man-made institution like ours, the law using that as your primary means of defense is still a little. I don't know. I mean, it's important to point out the I guess the hypocrisy of the legal system when it comes to those things.
Well, I think it's the hypocrisy of the argument. When they make the argument, they really, I think at the core of it is ultimately, at the core of it, an evasion of responsibility, or the chance to eventually evade responsibility for your actions. Because,
100% what it is.
like,
Abortion
even if you're not currently pregnant, you want the ability to back out of it. You want the ability to make a life not a life anymore because
it's inconvenient for you.
convenient. It is convenient to you. If
Abortion does not solve the problem of unplanned pregnancy because unplanned pregnancy isn't actually the problem. It's the symptom of a problem that more and more people in our society are not having sexual relations responsibly or in a rational or reasonable manner or quantity.
Yeah, I mean, it's just looking at. This started to be a problem. I guess even going back to maybe the 1920s, maybe. But the increasing rates of STDs. Let's see. If everybody I'm no medical expert, but if everybody was only having relations when they're supposed to, there wouldn't be any STDs, or at least none would be being transmitted, right?
Not necessarily. STDs can be transmitted by a number of methods. Most STDs are, in general, bloodborne pathogens. Things like hepatitis and other things like that can be transmitted by contact with infected blood, which means healthcare workers and other stuff, people who are treating injuries and such. or small accidents in which a person is cut can still transfer them.
But at
Okay,
least
well, that would be transmitted. Well, sexually.
Child- sorry.
Yeah. So I mean, the point is that societal norms being what they are, it's and what they were in the 70s, because we just got over the decade of love, man, the summer of love, which I believe was 68 or 69.
68.
Yeah, okay. So
Wait, if 68 was the summer of love, then what was the deal with the summer of
Yep.
69 that wasn't?
I don't, I don't know. Anyways, yeah. So no, I mean, so yeah, we that was 4 years removed, right? So I don't know. The 60s were a moral cesspool, but it was brewing for a long time. Anyways, enough boomer bashing. Actually, that's
I
a
mean,
lie. There could never be enough boomer bashing.
I have great respect for my parents, but at the same time, like the only decent like group of boomers are not the counterculture, but the counterculture that weren't complete degenerates. You know what I mean?
Well,
Like
no,
the
I mean,
people against that, because you have on one side boomers who just completely sat on their wealth and didn't distribute it, kind of like spent all of their, all of their life savings buying them a few more years, stuff like that. And it's kind of like, I won this, and then it comes from them winning, I guess, winning World War II, where they kind of had this notch on their shoulder, and it was just a perfect storm, I guess, of like the counterculture and like, oh yeah, we were in the most prosperous time in American history, because like after World War II and then going into the 60s, they had it really good, really good, really, really, really good, and it just kind of didn't flow down, and we're just kind of stuck, and then Roe v. Wade comes along, and then the counterculture comes along, and then all that stuff. We've dealt with this kind of thing before. I mean, it's not new by any means. It's people constantly pushing the conservatives, and the conservatives in this country aren't conservative, so they're just kind of want to be left alone, and they kind of want the status quo. But then again, when you have such a force that's pushing everything, you're going to have a lot of things that's going to slip through, and Roe v. Wade is one of those things. And through Roe v. Wade, you enter into a new era of kind of the worst form of me culture, which is, I want what I want, and you know what? If something else is standing in my way of what I want, even if that is a child, sorry, but I'm going to make myself think that's not a child. I'm going to lie to myself and tell myself that thing that's within me isn't a child. And then you get into the experiential arguments of where, oh, but you're not a woman, so you wouldn't understand. I think it's pretty easy to understand. I'm not a lawyer or anything, but I'm pretty sure I can gather when a murder's happened, or I can gather when manslaughter's happened. I don't need to be a lawyer to know that something's wrong, and you dang sure don't need to be anyone special to know that a child in the womb and a child outside the womb, the only thing different is they're getting nutrition from their mother, the very same person who is plotting to kill them. So let's bring that to the floor.
And I would
understand you're not a woman argument. I hate it when they bring up the whole doctors should be included in on the issue, medical experts should be included on the issue.
What if they're
making a scientific question and trying to make it so the people who don't agree with abortion appear superstitious or unscientific. But the reality is it's not a medical question on whether or not abortion should be legal. It's a strictly moral question.
Like, what if every doctor on the planet that talks about this is a man? What are they going to do then? I know that's not even, but like, people can have alternative ways. They don't even need to have a qualified opinion, absolutely, to express their dislike for something. They can use basic logic to understand that, hey, that's not necessarily right, because you look over here and it's completely opposite. It doesn't take that much of a smart person to realize, hey, look over there. If you stab a woman to death with a knife, and she's pregnant, that's double homicide. But if you kill a child in the womb, just the child, and you're the mother, that's fine. It's not that hard to look at and say, hey, that's not quite right. And even from a non-religious perspective, you can look at that and say, yeah, there might be something wrong here. I think we might need to look into this slightly more than we have been. But I guess body my choice, so it doesn't matter. I guess I don't know.
And I would say that getting back to I guess last week, which was the culture. Even though by last week for most of the YouTube audience it was Thursday because long story. Anyways, so no, I mean the problem that American conservatives have had, quote unquote, is that they're trying to revert themselves back and claim that Washington or whatever, or well, not Washington because he was, I guess, at least somewhat based, but the founding fathers are trying to claim legacy from the founding fathers, and they're trying to justify their conservative, quote unquote, positions from the founding fathers when their liberal opposition, who were intellectually honest, um, are better heirs to Jefferson and whatnot, right? Because this sort of do what you want mentality, this sort of new school liberalism is really ultimately, and I know I'm going to get shot by some Americanist heretic or just by somebody for saying this,
Oh
but
boy.
Oh boy.
no, this
Our wonderful-
modernist, I mean, this modern liberalism is really just a natural extension of what
We're
the
gonna
founding fathers actually pushed.
we're
Now,
gonna have to do next week of how Charles was brutally gunned down in the street.
how I was gunned down by a bunch of libertarians.
Char-
I mean, how
Charles has been
The main
Charles
street.
has been found dead. Charles
The-
is
the-
found dead in like the
the
streets
when
of Florida.
libertarians attack, the 1950s horror movie.
Yeah.
No,
Anyway,
but I mean,
on a more serious note, next week we will be discussing the trial of King Charles I of England, as well as a post-mortem and otherwise of the Jacobite cause, because the anniversary of Charles I's death is January the 30th, and the anniversary of the death of Bonnie Prince Charlie is January 31st,
I
when
wanna
next
watch
week's episode
the
will be
word.
put on YouTube. But
You might wanna
anyway, go on
back
with...
to what I
Warren
was, yeah. No, I mean, so I mean, the problem that American conservatives, quote unquote, have always everything that they've run into is that they're trying to just appeal to the legacy of the founding fathers or whatever, when really, and this is sort of ironic given that the new generation of liberals is tearing down the founding fathers statues, they're
Yeah,
the better heirs to that
there's
original American Revolution. And the thing is that America's conservatives have always been classical liberals who have wanted to draw a line. But the problem with liberalism is you realistically can't draw a line. And this is why, societally speaking, America's conservatives have always been pushed back because they're not standing on a firm ground. It's not like, the position of, well, this was okay, but now we're going too far is not really realistically a line you can stand on, because
when you think about it, America, at least ideologically, was built on a slope. It was always we talk about the slippery slope, but it's kind of always existed on a slope. And we're going to get into my comments that I have about Thomas Jefferson. I like some of the things he did, but once we get into our special topic, we can really dig into what I have to say about Thomas Jefferson.
Oh
But
boy.
going back to what America is, it's kind of it's built on a slope, and that slope is moving further and further towards liberalism, because every side in America is liberal. There is no real conservatives in America, maybe barring the few loyalists that are still here somehow, and have been here for the last few hundred years, maybe. They may be out there somewhere. They might be right here. Maybe. Wink, wink.
Nice.
But
Actually, one of
Comes out
my
next week.
ancestors, like I guess, one of my distant uncles, I think, was actually a royalist officer in the Revolution, and he married into the Dutch part of the family. He's buried in British Honduras. Anyways,
I mean, I think America, in order, and this might be something interesting to say, America would a conservative, a true conservative America would be a monarchist America, and that's just like, oh, you need to be conservative to be monarchist. No, monarchism and conservatism go kind of hand in hand. Of course, you can have a non-conservative be a monarchist, and a monarch, even a monarch, or a monarchist, be a non-American. They can go hand in hand, but they both fulfill each other. At least the traditional mindset of monarchism, not necessarily the modern iteration. Maybe you can be a liberal of sorts and be kind of a constitutionalist monarchist. But at least the way some of us look at monarchism is especially kind of it's boosted by conservatism. So I could definitely see a true American conservative movement being monarchist. And that's what our first real conservative movement was in the 13 colonies, though it was kind of a conservatism for the parliament, the parliamentarian system that was in the British Empire, but it was still.
well, actually, I would disagree with you there because the the people who took over the colonies were essentially just the counterparts of the Whig oligarchy at home that was fighting for the Parliament and trying to strangle out royal control. Because George III had actually been trying to reassert the royal prerogative, although in a slightly awkward way of getting a prime minister who was in favor of doing whatever the king wanted. So uh, let's see, George the Third. Let's not check myself. Anyways, George the Third was, even though I am a Jacobite and don't necessarily like the Hanoverians, George the Third was a monarch that I could respect because he was actually trying to reassert the royal prerogative, and the Loyalists, by and large, were supporters of that because the Whigs at home, well, not at home for us because we're the we're the Rebs, but but the Whigs in London were the ones who were trying to uh, not support or trying to get the war effort, shut down and have the colonies, right? Because their their counterparts were the ones who were in charge of the oligarchies in the colonies. And the colonial oligarchs really didn't like the royal governors that the king still appointed, because the colonial oligarchs, funny thing about the taxation thing, but the oligarchs would try to raise taxes, and the poor farmers who actually had the royal governors to appeal to, and the royal governors could shut down those oligarchs who were in charge of the colonies. And of course, once those the royal governors were gone, we suddenly don't have to deal with that anymore now, do we? So yeah, I mean the royalists, the royalists in the American Revolution um really were, the loyalists were really royalists, to the extent they could logically consistently be, because unless you really wanted to actually go full Jacobite mode, you would have to acknowledge that Parliament has some role to play in national affairs because Parliament put the king in. Anyways, we'll save the Jacobite
But
stuff for next week.
It's difficult when you're thinking about what a genuine American conservatism can be, and we kind of have a few. I mean, really, I only see monarchism as a way to American traditional conservatism, as opposed to kind of this weird libertarianism kind of thing. Progressive. Well, it is progressive.
The
It's classical,
liberal free market capital
that
with
kind of.
so
Liberal,
My
right.
markets are the only good thing. I mean, like, don't get me wrong. I support markets and I support markets in general. But if you make the market if you have like when it comes to economic system, if you had the economic system for the economic system's sake, it's not going to produce good results. Capitalism for capitalism's sake is bad, and it's only not as bad as communism, because communism will always fail, whereas capitalism could hypothetically works.
Almost like a moralistic capitalism would be what would be needed to like kind of. But I mean, a conservative America is possible. You just need to look in the right place. And I think going back to our kind of point before we springboard off, I think a conservative America would actually fight back against this stuff. But the one problem is we don't live in a country where conservatism exists. We live in a country where market liberalism has two sides, one the conservative quote unquote side and one the progressive side, and kind of nothing else. And we kind of live in a society in which needs and is constantly hungering for conservatism, and at least in some ways like this, and it's just not getting it. So I think that's what would be good for America, to kind of reestablish at least some degree of sanity. You wouldn't be able to do that with, and of course, conservatism, in my mind, is, at least in my mind, not necessarily on paper, is synonymous with monarchism. So you heard it here, guys. Apparently, monarchism is good for America. I don't know.
How would anyone even infer that would have been our position?
Yeah.
Good thing we came out and told them.
Man,
Yeah.
it's almost like our organization is called Monarchists of America.
Wait.
Whoa.
Anyway,
Whoa.
I will let you have the last word, then we'll move on.
For those of you who know me, those of you who are long-term viewers, you know I take a much more moderate role than some of my compatriots.
Are you
Correct.
telling me, Chris?
However, Roe v. Wade has been one of the most, in a long-term view, it has backfired more than any other decision that the Supreme Court has made.
And that's saying a lot.
To go,
I wouldn't disagree with that. Go on, Will.
Sorry.
and
Was that your...
why? Let's allow me to recite the ruling that Roe v. Wade made, that abortion would be legal, safe, and rare. It is legal. Its safety is questionable, and it's anything but rare.
I think that's in I think that safe, legal, and rare. If you're talking about the child, I don't think it's.
Oh yeah, if you're talking about the child, it's not safe at all.
You're going to die.
Yeah.
That's not cool. Why is it okay?
Procedure that has a 50% mortality rate guaranteed.
Speaking of mortality rates,
You know who
this is not a very good way to say get to the next topic, but I will do my best.
had it?
Good one.
Speaking of 50% death rate, the guillotine has a probably 100% death rate. The executioner knows what they're doing. Today,
Today we're recording.
The bloody
on the
left.
day of this,
So forced.
recording,
That
today,
was so forced.
Speaking of the person that absolutely died.
yes, okay, yes, today, as of this recording, January 21st, 2022, is the anniversary of the death of Louis XVI, King of France, who was guillotined by revolutionaries on this day in 1791. To give a further perspective that we wouldn't otherwise get, I did an interview Thursday morning with a French monarchist called Emile. We are here with Emile today. This is being recorded on Thursday morning of January 20th. Emile, how are you?
I'm very pleased to be with you today, and I'm very good today.
Thank you very much. So tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into the topic of Louis.
Yeah, sure. What do you want me to tell?
Oh, just some basic information, as much as you're willing to share.
About me?
Yeah.
I'm called Emile. I'm 18 years old, and I'm a French royalist. And I'll be participating into a march about Louis XVI. Later tomorrow in the January 21st of 2022 because we have a march in France organized in Paris every year in order to honor the King Louis XVI, and every royalist try to be there for the march.
Thank you very much. Okay, so tell us a little bit about Louis XVI's legacy in France.
All right, so today when you go to school in France, children are regularly told that kings were evil and greedy for power, and when the French Revolution came, it was all the people that revolted against injustice. But what they are not told is that by killing the king, by killing Louis XVI, the revolution also killed the freedom of the communes, the freedom of the workers, and the freedom of worship. Because as you know, in the revolution, you had a lot of massacres, with including women and children, especially in the Vendée War, if you know about that. Vendée was a French region that rebelled against the revolution, and they killed everyone. So today we have a march for Louis XVI because he was an innocent king, a beneficent king, a protector of the civil and public liberties. As you probably don't know, because even in France a lot of people don't know about that, but Louis XVI had abolished many taxes. He gave a lot to the people for their education, for their liberties, for their health, like he gave to women the right to vote. The Republic then refused to give women the right to vote until 1945 because they were fearing the influence of church in women's vote. So it's in memory today, in 2022, we still honor the memory of the king, of this murdered king, because we do not forget, despite the Republican apathy that puts the French people to sleep, that Louis XVI was a king that does not. He was doing everything he could for the welfare of the people, and the Republic is actually not trying that. With the liberties, for example, at his time, you had a lot of cooperation. It's the medieval term, not in English. We call that guilds, I believe. And it was everything we don't have today. So it gives us a lot of hope and duty to work for the restoration of monarchy in France, to see that at the time of his death, he had done everything he could for the French people, for the liberties, for the welfare of the state and of the population, that the Republic is not capable of doing. So it's a big inspiration for us, and to see that the Republic was also evil at the time.
If I
So,
may ask a question,
of course.
is it true that the revolutionary government suppressed a lot of the smaller subcultures within France, such as the Britons and the Occitanians?
Yes, it's true, but it was later. It was not the first republic, especially, but more the second, more the third republic. When the third republic went into it, 1870, after the Prussian War. Note that the third republic went to power because they actually killed workers that were rioting in Paris. It's the Commune of Paris, you probably know about that. And you are right, they said that la République est une et indivisible. The Republic is only one. You know, all the people are one into the Republic. So you can't have a different culture as the Republican one. But who makes the Republic? It's Paris, the people of Paris, the bourgeois, the rich people, they are making the Republic. So all the poor people from, as you said, Brittany, Alsace, south of France, Provence, all of these people were told you don't have the right to speak your local language, for example, in school. And you don't have the right to get your own culture. The République, with the Hussards Noirs de la République, the black hussars of the Republic, as Charles said, because it was at the time teachers were seen as soldiers for the Republic, to give the Republic ideals into all the classes of the society in all the region of France. So you're right, they actually oppressed all the cultural, local cultural things every people in France had.
It's really ironic that the French state media are celebrating the fact that French is being taught in schools in Louisiana as French is sort of a I guess a subculture, I suppose, of the state of Louisiana, and they oppressed the Breton language, the Occitan language, etc. It's really ironic that they're celebrating this sort of subcultural, like, local French, whereas in their own country they don't celebrate the local languages of the dialects of people in metropolitan France. Anyway, sorry for that rant. If the French monarchy is restored, what do you see as the sort of after effects in other European nations that don't have monarchs? Do you think we'll see more of a push to get them restored? Or do you think that it's not going to affect anything?
I don't.
I'm sorry?
My microphone was yeah. So
Yeah, that's
I
fine.
was
That's
saying,
fine.
yeah, I was saying that I think that France is one of the last country in Europe with a real monarchy culture, because we still have strong monarchy ideals and ideas. So even if we succeed in restoring monarchy, I don't believe that, for example, Germany will be capable of restoring their own monarchy, because they had, for example, World War II. You know, they really fear all the government that's not a republic. Or Italy, they have a very strong feeling with their own republic. And in any other case, UK is a monarchy, Belgium is a monarchy, Netherlands is a monarchy, Spain is a monarchy. So I really think it won't probably have as big of an effect on other countries, but I really don't know, to be fair.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions for Emile before we wrap this up?
No, I just kind of want to say bonjour, Emile. Comment ça va?
All right. Will, do you have anything?
I'm good. I just had the one question.
Okay. All right. Well, this concludes our interview. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Emile, for talking to us. If anybody on the panel has any thoughts before Will or I speak again, you can give your thoughts on the interview now.
Oh, actually, it is on what Emile said about the One Republic when it comes to the different culture things. Which I think you were gonna talk about, but This is actually something that we share in common in our American Republic. This idea of sort of one language and this assimilation, because republics by nature, if they don't have some sort of national, some sort of unifying figure like a monarch who they can all appeal to as subjects, and in that sense we're all brothers and the same family, despite the fact we all have different cultures. um you know that But in republics, they need assimilation, and that is a parallel that we see in the United States, which is ironic because unfortunately Louis XVI helped us gain our independence,
I'm
which in retrospect was probably one of his bad moves. But the thing is that we always have a habit of assimilating cultures. Now, because of the fact that everything in merry old England was so miserable, there were a lot more colonists over here per capita than the French or the Spaniards. Um, you know, we simply outpopulated a lot of the Creole. We outpopulated the Creoles when we took over Louisiana because we just sort of us Yankees. Although I suppose it would have been a lot more Dixies in like southern Louisiana, but the us Yankees kind of flowed in, and it was the same thing with the small French population and the Indians in Michigan and the other parts of the state, and the same thing with the Californios, right? So even if it's just outpopulation, but then the idea that we shouldn't but that these different cultures are bad, and I am part German, and this is a pretty common story that before World War One, German was the second largest spoken language in the United States, but then once World War One happened, and because of Wilson, um, uh,
Wait a second, we can't blame Wilson all for that. There was also a general prejudice in the American public too.
well,
I don't
yeah,
know, man.
but the
I
war
think we
didn't help
can
that,
blame
how
him
did
for
it?
everything.
Look. Okay,
Yeah.
if there's one we can all agree on, even if Will here doesn't particularly agree with my FDR policy, Wilson is responsible for indirectly for a lot of our ills when it comes to foreign and domestic policy post his reign. But anyways,
Wilson is second to the Antichrist in my opinion, but that's
I wouldn't go that far. But no, I mean, this is the thing, right? The Germans in this country, apparently, even in Michigan, I can't remember where. I want to say Frankenmuth because that's where we have a bunch of Germans. That's sort of our main German cultural hub, and they retain some of their Germanness in the architecture, but German isn't spoken as a first language there anymore. I think. Nice place to visit though. They have the largest Christmas store in the world. But anyways, apparently one woman broke into the German high school or elementary school or whatever, gathered up a bunch of the textbooks which were in German, and then burned them. I mean, this is the thing, right? And it would have had to happen eventually, if not in a probably presumably less volatile manner, because republics always breed assimilation. It is something that we can't. Um, that the Republican ethos can't actually avoid. And this is sort of something that the Democrats on the surface don't get, but they still kind of do when it comes to the Latin Americans coming into the country, right? Because the thing is, oh, they're not learning English or whatever, right? But they're, because of poor catechesis and are meddling in Latin American affairs throughout the entirety of, I mean, ever since the Monroe Doctrine, came into force, the catechesis has been very poor. So when Latin Americans come here, they don't know how to defend the faith, so they either apostatize or just don't, try to convert their new next door neighbors. And generally speaking, with the exception of their language, and surface level manifestations, which because they've lost their deeper meaning become absolutely worthless. Um, they're essentially as American as anyone else. I mean, at least in my summation, they don't
Yeah.
particularly. I mean, it's not like they carry over the rich, Catholic / Hispanic culture that the Spanish gave them, and some of the cool elements of the native culture that were compatible with Catholicism. They didn't carry that over.
I tell you, that's the thing that I think Catholics really dropped the ball on, at least Roman Catholics. They have kind of lost a lot of cultural things. And you got to give it to the Orthodox and people like that, Eastern Christianity. It really did a bang up job of keeping those traditions alive. But I do have some quite heavy bones to pick with a few of our presidents, actually. This whole thing with the French Revolution. If you were finished on that topic, you can
Yeah.
go on.
There is a question that I wanted to get answered before you dive into the presidents, if you don't mind, John.
Sure.
There is a question in our VC text channel on Discord from Leon Korolevsky. Should we allow for artificial autonomous regions for some ethnic groups, like the republics in Russia?
I think
Uh,
if we're in a monarchy, no. I don't know about if we're in a republic. I would say just let them break off if they're going to if they're going to try and enforce a cult. I don't personally like cultural ethnostates. I hate it, or at least ethnostates. I don't like ethnostates. So I would personally say no to that. But I can see them breaking off, at least in practice, because that's just the nature of republicanism, at least in my opinion. It's a very divisive form of government.
Basically, what we do with the reservation system when it comes to Native Americans, and we see how well that works out for all parties involved.
yeah,
And
I don't know. I mean, it
if
it, it
we
was. Oh,
if we have monarchy, reservation systems could easily become, at least you just say the elders, the monarch, and then just have them be a state. You know, that'd be
yeah.
kind of a. Actually, I'd love that. But the thing
I've
about
No,
had
I
is
mean,
a lot of
we're
times that our first monarch probably should be elected from one of the Native American monarchies.
well, ignoring that dumpster fire of who should be our first monarch. No, I mean, but the thing is that it used
I
to. Before they got assimilated, and even today, there are some towns that still retain this. There were actually culturally Catholic and actually Catholic towns that were established by French or German or Irish immigrants or whatever, right? And because they were removed from the rest of society, uh, okay, that sounded wrong because they
all
settled
right.
away from the rest of society. Um, they prospered and even so, but in this modern connected world, especially, right? It doesn't have to be government diktat, even though it very well probably will still be this assimilation happened. It used to be possible, even though republics don't like it, and they would actively try to curb it, that you could have a separate culture. And there were, legitimately some pretty great Catholic, groups in this country, different nationalities or whatnot, and some of them actually did try to convert the rest of the country. It seems like America's domestic clergy hasn't done particularly a great job in that regard. What with the whole Americanist heresy and the immigrant priest or whatnot or
Yeah.
the greater evangelist, but but nowadays, I mean, I don't think it's realistically possible in a republic to have multiculturalism. I mean, even with the autonomous zones, I mean, there's just so much. The underlying values, as I said before, culture is the underlying values in society that inform those surface level manifestations. So even though those surface level manifestations may be different, the culture really is the same. And even I mean, look at this nationally. Even with the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant subcultures that existed in the United States, like the Southern agrarians and the Yankees and the the Midwesterners and all that. Really, what of those underlying values is really truly different, right? The differences between us in terms of our culture is us Midwesterners are nice to the point of it being a creepy horror movie. Bostonians think using turn signals is a sign of weakness. And
That's
Southerners will
are
welcome into your home and give you scones, I guess. Like,
Midwest. No, that's a lie. You've clearly never been stuck in traffic in downtown Columbus. There is nothing nice about Midwesterners.
Now, I will say we're not exactly the same. I mean, it's not. We're not kind of clones. I think pop culture is kind of trying to do that with us because architecturally we're the exact same. But I think culture still tries to differentiate itself, and I think that's perfectly fine. I'm kind of I guess, a plural nationalist. I'm kind of like a nodal nationalist. I think that various cultures within a nation need to retain some similarities, but of course, for some variation, there can be some change. But I think I have actually a good point as far as kind of Americanizing Catholicism, and I think this is kind of vital. You ever heard of? I believe his name is Alexis Toth, and this man was a married priest. He was a married priest. He was a married Catholic priest. I believe he was a Ruthenian. I might be wrong there. But
how do I spell it? How do I
yeah,
spell his last name?
Toth.
Toth.
And he is actually a saint in either one of the Orthodox churches. And the main reason is because an Americanist, or basically, saw a problem and essentially, because you had a culture of Americanists that kind of rejected whole cloth the concept of diversity among Catholics. And I guess it goes back to your point in which even if you're Catholic in America, it's kind of that enforced unity and that forced not unity, but a forced assimilation as far as religious go. And he was actually forced, and this was enforced all the way to the Pope, where there was a declaration that in America, no Catholic priest, Eastern Catholic priest, could be married in America. And overnight, I think
20,000.
200
20,000 or 200,000.
200,000 Catholics became Orthodox overnight. So
Yeah.
we really need to look at this, and going back to kind of relating this back to what we are talking about is enforcing a diversity isn't necessarily resigning to the concept of something like nationalism. It's in nationalism, I think in monarchy could go hand in hand, but it wouldn't be the nationalism that relies solely on culture. And American nationalism, American patriotism, relies in a way on a strict set of cultural beliefs, supported by the popular culture, supported by, in a way, Protestantism and even Catholicism, in a way. American Catholicism, I say.
You know,
It's and it all goes back to our system as a republic, and yeah, that it's all connected. That's what I like to say. It is all connected. And
the
this is
Americanist heresy is cringe.
yes,
Anyway, so let's dive back into Louis the XVI because that was what we were actually supposed to be talking about.
yeah,
Uh,
Charles. I can't believe you do something like that, man. Why did you do that?
Hey,
I don't know.
man,
Gosh, Charles.
man, I'm just a Midwesterner, so we gotta talk about what we feel like. When we're sitting at the stop and go light.
I don't want to hear
Uh,
it. I've sat here the entire
I-
time waiting patiently for my piece while you went on your rant.
Yeah,
okay, fine. There. Why don't you talk about
Will.
some stop and go light thoughts?
Anyways, I'm Will, and I think King Louis XVI deserved it, or something like that. I don't know.
Hey,
What's your
oh, don't you dare even go to. You're lucky we're not allowed to curse on this podcast right now.
what's up? What's up?
I
I
said
thought
you're lucky we're not allowed to curse on the podcast.
Thanks to my diktat.
I can override it. Whatever.
Yeah,
Uh,
So,
Anyways,
don't know if it's
Orwell.
the rules of the
Orwell.
I
podcast.
give you
would be cursing like
Will. I give you an indulgence to say a naughty word.
oh.
I'm saving that for if we talk about presidents because I too have something very choice to say about Thomas Jefferson.
I'm
Oh,
tempted to use it right now. I'm tempted to
We're
use it
gonna
right now.
tag
Okay,
him.
what should I use it for?
yay. So,
Anyway,
anyway,
we'll say
Will,
his
did you
piece.
have any serious thoughts on the issue before we go back to Louis XVI?
On the issue of
What we were talking about? What were you gonna say?
culture in America, not particularly. I think you guys hit the nail on it pretty good. What I really want to say about the French Revolution is, and it's very, very clear and obvious in the way the French government is, because the French Republic, it's a unitary republic, even for a nation its size. It's not a federal republic like the US. It doesn't have subnational divisions, it doesn't have states, or provinces, or districts that have some governing autonomy. It's a unitary system. It's all centered around Paris. And I think this really stresses the actual reality of the French Revolution. Excuse me for a moment. It was a Parisian revolution. It was a revolution for Paris, by Paris, and with little regard to anyone else in France.
And I know that the YouTube audience heard this a short time ago, but we'll bring the Vendée back up.
So,
I love the Vendée.
so Paris was so the French Republic was by Parisians, for Parisians, and of Parisians. Is that what you're telling me?
But by the Parisian coffee shops, for the Parisian coffee shops. Third
Almost
one.
the entirety of the French revolutionary forces centered around Paris and other major populated cities. And around the coastal areas and the more rural areas and in the smaller cities, they were staunchly royalist still.
Yeah, well, I mean, what happened there is that most of the nobles, and this is a fault. I know I'm going to get shot by another group of people for saying this. So when I die in a suspicious way, don't just jump to conclusions. But I don't particularly care for a lot of what Louis XIV did. Okay, I'm waiting for somebody to knock down my door right now. Anyways, but what he did to this specifically relevantly was he had a bunch of the nobles come to Versailles, but a lot of the poor nobles that live in the rural areas couldn't, just afford to live in Versailles or whatnot. So they stayed with the people who they were, actually supposed to govern over. And when it came time for the French Revolution, the nobles who were in their area, like, were actually where they were supposed to be with their people, like in the Vendée, they were the ones that had the staunchest royalist support. And I think that's also important. And we could talk about this some of the time about why it's important also to have lesser nobilities in this country and not just to have just the monarch. But the people who rallied to the monarch in France by and large were people who had their lesser noble lords around them, which is interesting because if you believe the Republican ethos, that you would think that having a noble right next to your house would mean that you're oppressed and you're miserable or whatnot. It's
And
almost like they're
there's
liars.
a lot of issues involving Louis XIV and his reforms. A lot of it, the issues that led to the French Revolution, had to do with the French nobility's laws. Primarily, that nobles were not allowed to work or have a trade. Their income was entirely based off of taxes, meaning that if a noble came short on funds, he was not allowed to earn an honest living to supplement his royal income.
That is just really stupid. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm
No,
sorry.
It makes. I mean, when
Like,
it
when
makes
the
sense. It makes a little bit of sense though, because you want the noble to really work at being a leader of his particular plot of land, if you catch my drift.
Well,
at the
you know,
same
way,
time,
like monarchs have a long line, and this is what I say: if you don't use it, you lose it. And when you have a set of monarchs or a set of sub monarchs or a set of royalty that aren't ruling over their people directly, that aren't over there helping their people, that aren't over there being of their people, there's no point in having a monarchy. If you, as a aristocrat or as a monarch, are willing to go to a place like Versailles, so far away from where you rule, and it's essentially moving across Texas. So you go to say San Antonio, and you're all the way your royal fiefdom is in freaking El
Oh,
Paso,
yeah.
and you you can't rule them. You cannot rule them. During that time, distance mattered, and it's asking for trouble. It's asking for trouble.
and
So while I while I and we will get me and will tag team Thomas Jefferson. But I think it in their attempts to radically centralize the French government, and I don't think centralization was needed at all, really. They inadvertently opened the door for, if you fail, it's boom or bust. If you have one area in which a monarch can rule and their royalty can, any royalty can rule effectively, even the nobility, you're going to run into heavy problems, and that's what they did. They ran into heavy problems, and they didn't have the monarchs there to help the people. And that's why I think, and I agree with Charles, you can't just have a monarch at the head of a government. You need to have monarchs, and it doesn't have to be imported royalty. It doesn't have to be anything like that. It can be statesmen of that region. It can be the patriarch of that town. It can be anything like that. And if they help the people, if of the people, and if they're there to assist to them, and that's at the end of the day, nobility are set aside to be that. They are set aside to be nobility, and they are set aside to lead the people. And I think, in addition to that, I think they need to know what it's like to get their hands dirty. They need to know what it's like to have passions in life aside from leadership.
and
I
I would
that's
actually.
and
Well,
that's
I mean,
the through line,
sorry.
and that's actually the through line, because they can and that's the beauty of monarchy, is not every monarch is going to be the same. You might have a patron of the arts as the next monarch, or you might have a great general as a monarch, but it's allowing these monarchs to express themselves through the royal lineage, is where you really get diversity, and it's not just a gray sludge of monarchs getting um self engorging.
And I would say that that particularly one area that I think, even if they do other things like one's a great soldier or one's a craftsman, or you had Louis XVI then who wanted to be a watchmaker, which is very wholesome, I might add. He was just a wholesome guy in general. But anyways, you have the one thing that I think all nobles really should be, at least somewhat, is tied to the soil. uh,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
because this is the thing. Um, Farmers, and this is someone who isn't a farmer, but honestly, I'm seriously contemplating, if I ever get enough money, just buying a little plot of farmland and getting the heck out of this city, even as much as I love it. Just they, as as farmers are people who have to rely on God. They they know that their harvest is ultimately dependent on I guess what God gives them in terms of weather or whatnot. And I learned that lesson that lesson that you need to rely on God. If I could briefly regale the story of why I took till Thursday to get the podcast last week up, was because some some issue or whatever with Chrome and that web extension, and it wasn't working on Edge, Microsoft Edge, either downloading the audio. And I think on Tuesday or Wednesday or whatever, yeah, Tuesday, or yeah, Tuesday, I was like, help me, O Lord, in my unbelief, or whatever, which is just a common, prayer. And then on Wednesday, I'm like, I'm gonna give downloading this audio one more shot before I start trying to download each track individually, which would have been an absolute pain. And I'm like, okay, Lord, if it's your will that this podcast be made, please let it be so, or something to that effect. And it downloaded great. Now, somebody will say, okay, what if it was just some weird issue on there and then it finally started working? Oh, okay, whatever. You can believe that if you want. But you gotta realize, and this is the thing that I think farmers realize more than anything, and nobles who are farmers realize that God is ultimately the one in charge. And it's especially important for people in leadership positions to realize that you may have these grand plans, but it looks like you're not going on campaigning this year because you only got enough food to feed the population. So you're not going on campaigning this year. Maybe next year, because you don't have enough food to support a traveling army.
Anyway, you wanted to talk. You wanted to talk about Jefferson, so let's do that quickly. We'll go into the Reign of Terror.
I think the final comment for that is, before I go into skewering Jefferson and another founding father. If you don't have, I think St. Thomas Aquinas lined this out pretty well. The best form of government is a benevolent, holy monarch. And and everybody thinks like the people and the monarch should be separate. And I am of the opposite mind. I think if the monarch the one good Habsburg in the last 100 or so years that ruled was Emperor Karl of Austria. And he was one of the people on the front lines. He saw what happened there. And I think that's so important for a ruler. That is so important for a ruler. And it doesn't have to be just militarily speaking. Having a ruler that is within the people's midst, having a ruler, and that's ultimately what Christ did. He was in our midst. And if a ruler isn't in our midst, I think there's a huge problem there. And that goes to a monarch. On the topic of Jefferson, let me bring up the whole story of how the French Republic assisted us during the American Revolution. Oh, wait, it was the French Kingdom that assisted us during our American Revolution. It wasn't the French Republic. Huh. Our greatest ally in winning our revolution are the very people we sent sailing down the river with our propaganda, with our people that we sent over, with our various missions there. Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Paine, and they all perpetrated in the biggest backstab in America, or not, maybe not the biggest backstab in American history, but the biggest backstab in early American history. We turned around and to our biggest ally, stabbed them in the back. And when asked, oh, what about our alliance with the king? And it was like, oh, the king's dead, I guess, or whatever. So that is something that I will really forgive Jefferson for. Jefferson, Thomas Paine, they sold out our allies. However way you cut it, they sold them out. In the time of need, the French, and by the way, the entire French Revolution was essentially caused in part by opportunists in Paris taking advantage of a food shortage from which was caused by the American Revolution. And guess what? We went over there, and then in the same hand, those who had helped us just a few years earlier, we sailed them further down the river. And that is something I will never forgive Jefferson for, and that is something that I don't think anybody should forgive Jefferson for. Jefferson, and I think Louis XVI was trying. Louis XVI was trying his best, and coupled with the reforms of his predecessors, coupled with all of that stuff, he was between a rock and a hard place. I don't know what he exactly could have done to make things better, but we absolutely made it worse, and that is something that honestly disgusts me to be an American. That we turned around to our allies who had just won us this war. They carried most of the weight for us. We turn right around and send our prime founding fathers in opposition. It's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking that we just forgot everything. And it goes back to, we think instinctively that care of the people and a monarchy is incompatible. But to have a person that cared enough about liberty to go across an ocean, even if it was against the British, to go across the ocean and assist in freedom, and then to have the people who won their freedom turn around and stab you in the back, honestly, it's despicable. And I don't
Liberty
think
and freedom. Liberty in France was ancient. Tyranny in France was a recent addition.
yes.
Somebody said that, and we brought it in. We helped bring it in, folks.
Lasted over 1,000 years. There's been 5 French republics since the Revolution. That's all you need to know.
We brought hell into France. We brought it. We did it, folks. Us. Our government, this grand republic of ours, sent forth the destruction of France. At least enabled it. No aid, nothing. We sailed them down the river. I know we were in debt and whatever, but they were our allies and we abandoned them. So, folks, we did it. We assisted them, and
And the reason why we didn't do anything in 1789 was that there was a huge debate over whether our foreign policy should be pro-French or pro-British. And I forget which side won that debate.
Well, no, I mean it was ultimately, I think, because Jefferson was in office, it was the pro-French side, but who were the I can't remember if the pro-British or pro-French thing split along Federalist and anti-Federalist lines, but
It did.
oh, it did. Okay, but I mean, the thing is that, in a way, some of the ideologies that influenced the American Revolution did come out of Enlightenment France, because Enlightenment, but ultimately, and really, there wasn't much we realistically could have done to actually support the legitimate French government. I mean, what were we going to do? Send an American Expeditionary Force? But
that's the thing, we accelerated it.
Yeah,
we our people over there to accelerate it. That's the big thing. It's one thing to try everything we can to assist our allies. It is an entirely different thing to essentially accelerate our allies' destruction by fomenting revolution in France.
if our nation's leadership was honorable, American forces would have been there beating Napoleon at Waterloo.
Well, no, not even then. If they were honorable, they would be there.
They would have gotten over there, so it could never matter. But
yeah, it would have been before Napoleon even came to power. They would have been there when they would have tried to negotiate the release of King Louis. They would have been doing stuff like that. They would have been over there if they could have. If we had an honest government, they would have at least tried to assist our allies in a time of need. And instead of assisting our allies, we assisted their enemies. We assist our enemies. We stabbed them right in the back. And, it's disgusting. And you talk about the Federalist and Anti-Federalist. I kind of have a slight qualm or whatever, slight bone to pick against Hamilton for being so pro-British, but I don't know if he was pro-British before the French became the French Republic. I don't know if he would have did. I would hope he would have had a different agenda to the French if the French had stayed a kingdom. But I don't know. It's horrible. The man was dealt a very bad hand, and we didn't help in any way, shape, or form. We were just excited that for some reason we saw the French anarchists and the French radicals and the iconoclastic French as an ally, as opposed to at least somebody that proved that you can acknowledge the rights of man while at the same time acknowledging the rights of the dead. And I guess it kind of added that thing where you can be one or the other. I think this is where it started. You can either be one or the other. And
It's just,
And
I don't know, God save the king. That's what I have to say.
And we should
it's your turn, Will.
Yeah, Will needs to answer Jefferson.
And I have my indulgence right.
I believe so.
Depends on what you say. I don't know. We don't want to.
As long as it's not a blaspheme.
No,
Or
blasphemous.
uh,
I just need to point out how much of a bloody hypocritical bastard Jefferson was. This is a man, despite all of his ranting, raving about democracy, liberty, and the values of the Republic, who, as Chancellor, beat to death, betrayed the French kingdom for the sake of his Republican values. And yet, he was so illicit back home at, for example, owning slaves and denying a large portion of the American population those same freedoms that he so supposedly cherished and enjoyed that the French were now adopting, but he advocated so hard for in France. So this man, this absolute scumbag, betrayed our allies for principles he didn't even follow, and for some reason he gets so much glory.
he wrote the Declaration.
Being a hypocrite in America as a leader is being a saint.
Oh, not to mention,
The Declaration.
also raped one of his slaves, had multiple kids with her, and then let those kids remain in slavery because he wouldn't accept them as his legitimate bastards.
But my Declaration.
Anyway, the left is piling on Jefferson enough. Let's, instead of Jefferson, let's pile on the reign of terror now.
Yeah.
And his
They
elected
were cringe,
president.
but at least they were intellectually honest about it.
No, I still see them as bad, but you get what you deserve. I mean, I don't know. It's poetic, having everything explode and then at the same time having a monarch come in and then the entirety of Europe turning its back on monarchy to destroy that and reestablish. I don't know if it was to reestablish the. Man, they could have done that. I don't know, a few years ago when it was a disgusting, degenerate republic. So, how about they do that beforehand instead of waiting and
The
waiting?
Austrians tried invading in the Austrian Empire, the Habsburg Empire, didn't try to invade France and to intervene in the whole situation, but they failed.
Yeah.
The ragtag
Which
French revolutionaries, the mob, beat the Austrian army.
I mean, it's
I don't
just
even know how the hell that happened.
I need to brush up on my revolutionary history, but there has to be a little bit of embarrassment there because I did read in admittedly a high school history textbook that has some rather interesting positions on what National Socialism was. But apparently, uh, they're like one unit of French revolutionary soldiers was so in the spirit of democracy that they got hung up voting on whether or not they would attack or not. Because clearly, if there's one place where democracy needs to be enforced in all times for the sake of ideological purity, it's the battlefield. No single commander here, no sir.
Reminds me of the early Red Army during the Russian Revolution. They had a democratic hierarchy and the original Red Army, and basically what it resulted in was a bunch of Red Army soldiers getting killed because nobody could agree on the chain of command.
Yeah, I mean this is actually a point. Um, in military situations, right? It's very beneficial to have a very chain of command to have a chain of command with a general or a field marshal or somebody ultimately in charge, right? Like a king, for instance, and then having people in charge of different subsections
Wait,
of the army under
wait.
him, like different
Me,
field generals and
telling me, Charles, that we should have a general based off merit as opposed to based off of election? You're telling
yeah,
me
yeah,
we should
yeah.
elect generals, Charles? What are you? What are
I
you? Some commie? What is this?
No, I also think that a hereditary warrior class is also a good thing, like those medieval knights. But but before but anyway, man, it's I don't know. It's just the French Revolution. I'm surprised the whole thing didn't just fall apart itself because of all that infighting and the fact that everything was going choppy with Monsieur Robespierre, who ultimately got
Napoleon
chopped
declared.
himself.
No, wait, it did fall apart though. It took Napoleon basically making
Cooing, oh yeah, cooing the state.
monarch to actually
What
fix it.
Well, yeah,
what was
but
that one
then again,
show, the chopping block? I just got reminded of that. Like I
I,
guess like what was that one show? I don't know.
I don't know. I
There
don't
was
know
like
what you're
this
talking
one
about.
cooking show. I'm just
So,
rambling. Don't mind me.
cooking with Robespierre. Anyways, no. I mean, it's just.
I
Let me. No, don't get me wrong. Napoleon was definitely better than the French revolutionaries that preceded him, but Napoleon was still kind of cringe.
well, the thing.
Napoleon actually, I believe, what was it, Napoleon or the Reign of Terror that essentially went forward about 200 something years into the future with certain rights that are now considered common.
Well, it was
I
it was
didn't
probably the French.
machine. I
Huh?
I'm
kind of thought.
sorry?
I didn't know they had a time machine.
Yeah. They went to the future, saw how crazy everything was, and then went mad themselves. Anyways, that's my theory. Anyways,
Excellent.
Was one of the in the French Revolution there was there were moderates and there were radicals. And the radicals were much more staunch liberals. Robespierre was a leader of one of the liberal factions, being the Jacobins. Now,
Oh yeah.
Robespierre
I
who
think
used
it's
to
like Robespierre and Jefferson's Excellent Adventure.
now the ironic thing is Robespierre was actually a staunch advocate of freedom of speech until at some point he lost his marbles. I'm not saying the word I want to say because I already used my indulgence.
Lost his head.
I was gonna say lost his shit, but okay.
Hey,
Oh,
hey.
anyway, well,
Let's tone it down. Let's tone it down there, Buckaroo.
I
You
guess
Ohioans really are
he
the
used up his
annoying
one
people.
indulgence he used up his one like swear word indulgence.
Yeah, he already
Can't
did,
do
and now he owes me money.
Come on, it's not
Ooh.
bad.
Eh.
Charles is a little Puritan, everyone. Little Catholic school.
Don't you dare call me a Puritan.
Do
There's-
not call
there's
Charles a
one
Puritan. He'll kill
There's
you.
one thing you can. There's one thing you can't call me. Well, there are a lot of things you can't call me, but a Puritan is near the top of that list. Puritans were cringe. They were anti-Catholic. They called us papists like it was an insult, despite the fact that it actually sounds kind of cool. And yeah, you know, papist. I am a papist, and proud. Puritan are cringe, but I can't think of a synonym of cringe that starts with P's, so I can't alliterate. But
Dumb.
anyways, pray continue.
let's get back to the actual point on Mr. Robespierre.
What do you mean this isn't the point?
It was always the point. This entire episode has just been a
Always
psyop for me to go on that one particular rant. You will acknowledge this.
Anyway,
beyond as he's boiling alive. I just want you to know, Mr. Robespierre, we didn't like France that much, anyways. At least when you were ruling it. And you were ruling, ironically.
So
You know, I hear where he is. It's quite warm this time of year.
Yeah.
No. Okay. We don't do that. Assuming people are in hell thing.
anyway,
Mm,
You
let's
can make an educated guess.
would he be
let's
in?
go back to talking about Louis XVI, the actual subject, the actual person that we are at least nominally supposed to be commemorating.
I mean, yeah, it was the great tragedy of the end of the 1700s. It was a tragedy, a tragedy of everything not working out well, and then your allies abandon you. Your predecessors betrayed you, even if they had the right idea about it had good intentions. They betrayed him. The past betrayed him. The future betrayed him. It's the great royalist tragedy. It is a great royalist tragedy.
And
He cared about his people. He didn't deserve what he got. And what followed destroyed France to this day. I would say what that reign of terror, France went from being the greatest among the Catholic nations to being barely even a religious nation, especially now.
I would even go so far as to say it's a secular nation.
Well,
Yeah.
it's an atheist nation. I think it's an atheist.
Considering what they're doing to Notre Dame, it might as well be an atheist nation because no good Catholic would vandalize that church like that.
Well, honestly, I mean, even the churches themselves are state owned now, and that's something that they never got away from. The churches are state owned, which is unbelievable, and that the fact that it's still in effect makes me think that it's an anti-religious nation, especially now. And I like to tell the people that I know, everybody talks about the communists, but we don't really talk about the people that kind of were the predecessors to the communists, and those were the French. And I think I'm confident when I say that they were iconoclastic, even to non-Catholic religions. They uplifted a pagan god to the altars. They did all that kind of thing. In fact, I believe that was supported by Thomas Paine.
Hang on a second, John. It appears France might actually have more respect for religion than us. France has, according to Leon Korolevsky and VC chat, France has 7 religious holidays. The US has no official religious holidays.
Well, technically, they take off for Christmas, which is technically a religious holiday, but it is not observed as such.
Well, I didn't say you're a religious nation either. I didn't say that either. But at least during that time, well, the thing is, we claim to be religious, and we are religious, at least in population. But our religion is very closeted and, quite frankly, teethless. Whatever. It's defanged. We have a very defanged religion. No, we have a huge population of religious people. I believe we're the last really bastion of religion in the West. I don't know if that's, at least by populace, not by government support. I know our government completely forgets religion on all the time, but at least our churches are church owned and not items of the state, which I would be very uncomfortable if my church was an item of the state. At least if that now, if the state was the church, I wouldn't have the same
time.
Anyway, so okay, not
it. Does anybody else have anything to say about King Louis?
I mean, actually, I mean, just to compare how the state, I know, Victor, you were going to say something, but I feel like this is important because this is somewhat related. Just to compare how the state treats religion currently in France and in in general in the West, and versus what Louis XVI said in his last will and testament. And if I remember, I'll actually include a link to it in the description. But he starts it off with, in the name of the very Holy Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. And he starts, I leave my soul to God, my Creator. I pray Him to receive it in His mercy, not to judge it according to its merits, but according to those of our Lord Jesus Christ, who has offered Himself as a sacrifice to God His Father for us other men, no matter how hardened and for me first. And he talks about how he dies in communion with the church and how he agrees with all of her dogmas. Which, and I'm going to pose this question, and I don't want anybody to necessarily feel bad or even to necessarily use this as to justify politics or whatever. But for any Catholics listening to this, especially, how can you agree with the Republican ethos? As bad as some monarchs may have been, I think the holiest people in government that I've ever seen, or well, not seen personally, obviously, but the holiest people in government that I've seen are those monarchs like Louis XVI, who honestly we should be praying for his intercession for miracles. I'm surprised his cause for canonization hasn't actually been open yet, but
yeah, I believe he is. In my honest opinion, I believe he's a passion bearer. And if for those who don't know what a passion bearer is, it is, though they are not explicitly a martyr, they accepted their death as Christ did. And that's passion bearers. I think King Louis would definitely qualify as a passion bearer. Just going off what I just read. That really strikes at my heart. This man deeply, really, really believed, even in his last days, he was repentant, and as all Christians should be. And the fact of that he was beheaded, that what happened to him happened to him. Like I said, it was a tragedy, and kind of adding on to what you said, it's monarchs. Now there are a few monarchs that I have a serious problem with, but they're always in less quantity than the republics. In a republic, you get a tidal wave of people who you could care less about. But with a monarchy, there are yes, there might be a lot of bad. There might be a good chunk of bad, but there's always a great king. And those great kings, sometimes they become sacrificial lambs. And that's what happened with King Louis. He was sacrificed on the altar of secularism and absolute depravity. And he did so, and this is why I'm going back to Passion Bearer. I think he was one. He goes back to declaring the dogmas and really reinforcing his Catholic faith in face of a mob that would go on to destroy Catholic churches, to remove church property, to clear out the churches, to destroy the statues, not and to gut from the inside out the great churches of France. And he faced all of that. He faced the onslaught of Satan. And I honestly think a lot of it was demonic. What happened in the French Revolution, some of it at least was demonic. And it is probably one of the greatest tragedies that led to the world we have now. It breaks my heart. It breaks my heart that a king like that would have to die because of this so-called freedom. And honestly, the only thing you have to worry about in a monarchy is bad kings. But then you look at a democracy like that, when you look at quote-unquote democracy, that a tidal wave of just a destructive spirit about it. And you want to destroy an entire culture because of some vague idea of democracy. You destroyed a man who was obviously pretty virtuous. Because of what? What was it all for? And when you ask what was it all for, it was all for our own, or for their own ideology. It was, and I believe there was a quote out there that, as far as liberals like this go, they would like the last king to be choked by the intestines of the last priest. And the whole French Revolution, that's what it was about. Even when Napoleon took the throne, Napoleon overthrew. He was a deist himself. He was of the same ilk as Thomas Paine was. It's still, though he was a little bit more lenient of the churches, he still kind of saw it as the opium of the masses, which is a callback to Marx. Not a callback, but in a way a foreshadowing of Marx, because he didn't use those terms, but he called it religion is what keeps the lower rungs of society at bay. And he said that in a weird juxtaposition to Marx, and I don't know how to square that. It's King Louis was the right king at the wrong time. That's all I could describe him as.
And I think that is the best possible thing to say as a sort of last word on His Majesty King Louis XVI. Earlier today in France, I know that this was covered in my interview with Emile, which y'all saw earlier on in this video on the YouTube version. There were rallies in France earlier today, especially in Paris, and they're commemorating Louis XVI's death requiem masses were held all throughout France.
Wait,
In,
commemorating life or death?
I'm sorry?
Like celebrating his death or celebrating his life?
I presume both, because there would have been
Yeah.
I know Action Française was and other monarchist groups were definitely going to be out in force, but
Yes.
there were definitely also
Oh.
some communists.
That's what
And
I was
there were
like. Don't
are
mourn him now. You already sentenced him to death and put to death a great person. Don't go ahead and mourn him now. There's no point.
thank you. But
Yeah.
anyway, there were a lot of requiem masses that were said today all throughout France, as well as I believe there was one in Aachen. The one in Strasbourg got canceled by the local bishop because, of course, it was to be said in the Tridentine form, and the Tridentine Mass is falling out of favor right now, but there were requiem masses held for him today in France, and there were rallies for him all throughout France today, and Emile was going to the one in Paris for him today as of the time of this recording. And now we switch to a happier topic at the request of my other hosts. Princess Ingrid of Norway turned 18 today and sat in on I believe it was a council meeting, and she was the first person that was not either the current monarch or the direct first in line heir to be present at one of these meetings. We
Yeah,
wish
I'd
Princess
love to.
Ingrid a very happy birthday.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, in a way, this kind of gives me, because when you have somebody that sits in at a young age to the political process, I think that's very important for a person who is going to inherit. It might not be tomorrow, it might not be one day, or it might not be tomorrow. I think they're second in line, so it'll be a while. But
Yes, she is currently second in line behind her father.
it'll be a while. But it uplifts my spirits to have to young monarchs' children or heirs to the throne who are interested in the political process, who are really supporting that at a young age. It is really needed if we are going to have a global resurfacing monarchism. We need a good example, a good modern example of what monarchs could and should be. And I'm praying, and I'm hoping, and I'm praying that this is a sign of things to come. I hope to God this is a sign of things to come. We need a good generation of monarchs who are willing to say, you know what, I'm going to fight for what's right. You know what, I'm going to be what I was born to be. And I think there's a beautiful, a scene about this, and it'll probably won't happen, but it's, I believe, Prince Charles storming Parliament. I think all monarchists have really seen it at one point. I think we all know the scene, right? I believe it's like a documentary type, not a documentary, but kind of like a autobiography of the future. It's interesting. But it's essentially him storming Parliament and dissolving Parliament and stating, "It's in my blood. I was born to do this." And I think there's quotes spread around. I guess the heir ethos, the numerous heirs that will inherit the thrones of the future. I believe there's a quote from William saying, "I will have a more hands-on approach to the monarchy," which I hope he does. I've heard decent things about William. He's not going to be king for. He's not going to be a king recently. Won't be a king unless unless Charles goes before he inherits or something like that. He won't be a king for a while, but I want to hope. I want to hope beyond all hope that this kind of thing, this kind of sign of things come. And I think you said, Will, if Will's still here, that this is the
Yes.
first time ever that this has happened. At least in Denmark. Or wait,
It's in Norway.
Norway. Sorry. Is that right?
Yeah, Norway.
Yeah. Hopefully it will be a symbol. And like I said earlier, a monarch is not the concept of a monarchy is not diametrically opposed to freedom. Not diametrically opposed to freedom. I think a monarch would be perfect for the checks and balances of a nation in regards to in a president type role. I think a monarch would do well there, where a monarch has power. He has the power to represent his people. He has the power to veto for his people. And at the end of the day, that's what he's doing it for. And any father or mother, that's why I think monarchy is beautiful, because there can be queens, and they can, and we haven't had a female president. We've had an acting female president, because didn't Kamala, didn't,
Yes,
they
she assumed she was acting president while President Biden was getting a routine procedure done for a few hours.
wasn't that procedure something hilarious that I can't say here? Or something like that.
Oh, yeah. And also, find it funny that hilarious procedure is the reason why we get the first woman president, technically. Absolutely hilarious to me when you think about it.
And on that,
all I gotta say is everybody thinks like, oh, monarchists are so patriarchal. All I gotta say is God save the Queen, and even though I don't like the Queen that much, but yeah, she's still a queen, and
Oh, Renee.
anyway,
oh, ain't it? I don't know.
Anyway,
rough.
okay. Okay, so John, are you finished?
Oh wow. Yeah. Has anybody got anything else to say?
I don't know. All I'll say is that we're approaching the 2-hour mark, and the 2-hour mark and its consequences have been a disaster for the human race given last time. So let's wrap up our prayers. Say some
Yes,
prayers for Louis
yes,
XVI.
let us-
If anybody
yes.
has no objections,
Hey, slow it down. It'll be all right.
everything's gonna be all right. I don't know. I
Anyway,
mean, but if we do want to go on longer, I
said-
would recommend
I said,
starting a new
Charlie.
recording.
I said, Charlie, that you can hop off.
Well, actually, I can't.
You can't.
I'm the one who's in charge of Craig. I'm the one who's in charge of the Craig bot. I can't leave.
I guess.
okay,
No. It's not like I had to go anywhere or anything. It's just that I think that if we are going to continue though, and why are we doing this here? We should be doing this in the podcast chat. Darn it. Anyways, we might as well let the plebs know on what goes on behind the scenes.
Pay no
little
attention to the man behind the curtain.
no. Well, my concern is that since we went over 2 hours last week, and that's when we started to have the trouble. That now that we've basically just gone over 2 hours, this time we might run into the same problems. But you know what? I'm not going to worry about it. It's going to be
Yeah, don't worry about it. Don't worry, be happy. Isn't that like a Bob Marley song? I don't know.
All I know is that the bitch sings it.
Yeah. God save the future Queen Norway.
Yes, and that is a very happy thing that we can sort of wrap up on. So let us conclude in prayer in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Eternal rest grant unto him, O Lord.
And may the perpetual light shine upon him. May his soul and all the souls of the faithful departed, through the mercy of God, rest in peace. Amen.
In the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
King Louis,
Rest in peace to His Majesty King Louis XVI of France, If you would like to follow along with if you would like to be with us live when we record our podcast, Fridays at 8 p.m. Eastern, in our Discord server, link is in the description, along with the rest of our social media.
All right.
Next week,
King Louis, the Passion Bearer, pray for us.
next week, we will, because the Monday that we are putting this up on YouTube is the anniversary of the death of Bonnie Prince Charlie. We will go into all about Charles York's favorite topic of all, Jacobitism, for the whole time, along with a recollection of the trial of King Charles I of England. So, until next week, may God bless you and may God bless the United States of America.